Hi, friends. Host Eric here, host Talking with Friends People. You may remember Overthinking from a video the other day on Buddhism, Christianity, and so forth. He's brought his INTJ friend Deborah here, who is going to give us her thoughts on Buddhism and extend perhaps some on where Overthinking left off last time.
Okay. So my name is Deborah, and I've been practicing Nichiren Buddhism for 48 years. So since I was like 17.
Nichiren,
And
can you explain a little bit about the
Nichiren,
difference?
I'm sorry.
Can you explain the different kinds a little bit?
Sure. There's lots of different kinds of Buddhism out there. A lot of people know about Zen and other versions that emphasize meditation. We are not that kind. That's an earlier form of Buddhism. Much like Christianity, there are many versions. A lot of people know about Shakyamuni Buddha, who is considered the Buddha of antiquity. And he taught many different things and taught in stages. So his early teachings were Hinayana, and they were more rules-based and basic things to help improve people's lives, like try not to kill each other, cook the meat, it's healthier, lots of different commandments. And interestingly, there were 500 commandments for women and 250 for men. So women weren't doing so well back then.
Well, they need twice as many commands.
Yeah, right. That's one viewpoint, but that's not a good one in my view. Anyway, so when I started practicing, they talked about that as kind of like laying a foundation about basic improvements to one's life and treating each other with a little more respect, if you could, and kind of compared it to like kindergarten and elementary school. Laying that foundation, we're teaching some really basic concepts. Later on in his life, he began teaching a higher level, which you might compare to middle school and high school. So more about the interconnectedness of life and some of the mystical concepts and explaining some of the laws of the universe and how to align with those.
Are they
But it still
sequential?
wasn't,
Do you
pardon,
have
it
to?
kind of is sequential.
Do you have to do the first one first, then the second one, and then the third
No,
one?
no, they're just different stages. So it wasn't like you had to graduate sixth grade to get to middle school. It was not like that. It's more the evolution of humanity over time and understanding. But you
So,
could
so do you
hop in
think
at any
that for a
point.
modern person, then it's more correct to go with the latest, the latest
The
of his
latest
teachings?
update.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll explain some of why. And then in the last 8 years or so of his life, he taught the Lotus Sutra. And he said that was his highest teaching and really contained the latest upgrade, if you will, and the one that would serve humanity in its own development and in its evolution of consciousness way into the future.
Okay.
And
If you were to associate any given behavior, so to speak, with, say, Christianity or Islam would be prayer, with Buddhism normally would be meditation. You say this is not a meditation focused form of Buddhism. So, what
not
practice
in
does it
that
take?
sense, not in that sense, because a lot of meditation is trying to calm us down. Early forms of Buddhism are trying to deny our earthly desires and, eliminate those and attain this place where we're kind of disassociated in some sense from those because they're believed to lead us astray. Whereas this form of Buddhism is really talking about earthly desires actually lead to enlightenment because they motivate us. We're here in this mundane world. The Buddha, in his last 8 years of his life, said, the time will come when the people will lose their understanding of any interconnection. They'll lose their understanding of who, what we are and how to be in the world. And
Why?
they will kind of have lost their mind and
Why
be
will?
so.
Why? What was his reasoning for concluding that that would happen but hadn't happened yet?
I don't know. I'm not in his mind. I really don't know. It was his prediction. So his view of the universe, of eternity, I'm not really sure because I wasn't there. But he
Okay.
predicted this time called the latter day of the law, and how it would just be a time where people lost their minds, basically, and they lost all sense of humanity, and they were polarized and aggressive and violent and just full of
And
greed
do you
and
think that's how people
self-centeredness.
are now?
Oh, yeah, I think we've gotten there. Oh, yeah. When I
And
first started
how do you
practicing,
reconcile with that with the fact that it's the least violent and least rights violatory environment that humanity's ever had heretofore?
I'm not sure that I would agree with that, and it depends on your view of violence, I think. So there's been lots
I mean, it's
of,
not a mushy word. Fortunately, violence means something very specific.
well, we have wars. Those have certainly continued, and they've only gotten more horrific with nuclear wars and chemical wars. And,
We haven't had any nuclear or chemical wars.
well, we did drop some bombs that devastated tons of people, and I've heard from Hiroshima survivors in person at conferences, and it's
So is
horrific.
that the low point of our humanity?
I would say it certainly is one of them.
So
And
we've
yet I
gotten
know
more
that
human.
some
We've gotten
people,
more human since then. Is what you're saying.
uh, in some ways, but I don't think we have really approached with real intention to change that underlying impulse for that kind of devastation and destruction.
Well, I mean,
And go ahead.
is it possible to change an underlying impulse towards use of force? I mean, certain circumstances is appropriate and others it's not, right?
Yes, I would agree with that. Absolutely.
So you can't get rid of the underlying impulse to use force, at least without forsaking justice entirely.
Oh, I'm all about justice, and so is Buddhism.
So how does one differentiate them between justified and unjustified use of force?
Well, I know that Josh talked a little bit the other day about the 10 worlds. So we have these life conditions, these states of life, from hell and hunger, animality, anger, tranquility, rapture, learning, absorption, bodhisattva, and Buddhahood. So hell, hunger, animality are talked about by the Buddha as the four lower worlds. And we relate that to our instinctual responses. And within all those 10 worlds, you have the potential, the mutual possession of all the other 9 worlds. So I may be in a state of hell and despair and feeling like there's no point in living. I may be in the state of hunger where nothing satisfies me. I'm just full of greed and acquisition, and it doesn't matter who I tromp over in the meantime. It doesn't matter if there's equity in the world. I just got to get more, 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 more. And then animality is power and domination, submission, those dynamics, and anger and rage and destruction. But even in the world, and a good
Okay,
example is,
so this is like a taxonomy of ways of wrongness or something?
I'm sorry, ways of,
Ways of wrongness, ways of sinning, basically?
um, no, not necessarily, because all of those worlds have the potential for use for good and use for bad.
How does one determine culpability?
You look at the intention and you look at the cause made and the situation and the effects.
So it's
So
basically
I can
like a
be,
Western legal system approach with liability according to both intentionality and consequence, depending on the
well,
circumstance.
from the law of karma, cause and effect, yes, there is the intention matters. The cause that you make matters.
Sure, intention matters, of course. That's why there's a difference between manslaughter and murder.
Yes. But even the world, say the world of anger, sometimes I'm just furious at someone, and sometimes I'm furious at injustice. So I can harness that anger I'm feeling in a more positive manner to fight against injustice. At the same time, I have to be really careful not to start hating on the other, the other side all the time and forget their humanity, because then that leads often to very bad consequences and very bad policies and lots of polarization.
So, do you see this as an exclusive and preferable worldview to some alternate worldview like Christianity?
I personally see it as a bit more evolved. I practiced many forms of Christianity in my teens while I was searching for what was going on in the world back in the 60s and 70s. Um, I view it as more evolved because it's not for a couple of reasons. I don't see Buddhism as so rigid in its paradigms and in its not commandments, but guidelines for behavior.
Isn't that just another way of saying it's less clear?
Well, that's my second part. Sometimes people like more traditional Christianity and Judaism and stuff because it is clearer to them. It's very black and white. You have your commandments, and it's this, it's that, and it does not, in my view, allow for some of the nuances of human interaction and life. And it takes the responsibility in some cases off of the individual.
That's not true.
Yeah, it is.
Give me an example.
I don't have to think about the situation. I don't have to do this. I don't have to take responsibility because it's this and
Okay, so
only
you're
this.
negating the idea that there are universal negative moral prohibitions.
No, I think there are negative moral prohibitions.
Okay, so if there
Generally
are
speaking, I
universal,
think we're not
but hold
supposed to.
on, hold on. If there's a
Okay.
negative universal moral prohibition, that means essentially we don't have to think about it. We can calculate in advance based on a limited number of facts whether or not it's morally acceptable, morally unacceptable, or morally obligatory. Now, Christianity affords us clarity regarding a negative moral frame, which is sort of negative rights respect, but it also affords us sort of a general directionality towards a positive moral frame, which says positive moral altruism comes in the form of forgiveness first and foremost. So, is there an equivalent kind of clarity on the frame level with this Buddhism that you're describing that can afford you actual decision making capabilities from normative questions about right and wrong?
I think they're very similar in those cases. Generally speaking, we don't kill each other. We don't steal. We don't covet other things from other people. In the case of we don't kill, there are some situations, we do have wars, or we do have struggles in situations where there's violence, and force might need to be used to stop the perpetrator for the greater good. But
So, are
that's
you a
not,
moral relativist? Would you say, or a moral absolutist?
I think I'm somewhere in the middle.
I'm pretty sure that's not plausible, really. It's like if you aren't an absolutist, then you're a relativist definitionally, one way or the other, right? So an absolutist will say, yes, we can make some universally applicable moral claims, limited ones, mostly negative claims. As far as positive moral indications go, we're going to have to use some kind of magical thinking framework, which is something like Christianity or Buddhism or something like that, you know. But the concern I have here is it seems that what you're saying can be twisted to justify just about anything. If you justify with enough impacts or heap enough purported benefits, you could justify just about anything with that kind of a vague framework. Does Buddhism have anything to say regarding that?
I don't think that's an accurate representation. So I grew up Christian, Catholic, and I explored a lot of things. I have great appreciation for those experiences because they did have a great positive moral compass, and they set boundaries, and they set an understanding of positive ways to treat each other and treat ourselves, and to try to build better relationships and improve our lives,
Okay,
improve
just to
humanity.
clarify, when I say negative, I mean stuff you're not allowed to do. When I say
Yeah,
positive, I mean stuff that is good to do.
I understand that. Okay. So in your previous conversation the other day with Josh, at one point you were talking about there are substances that you use to handle your life. And in some cases, society may view those as unhealthy, but you were questioning whether that is an absolute or is that considered universally unhealthy. But what if you feel like it's a healthy expression for you?
Right. My point was that people trying to convey onto me their notions of health as derived from their resonance with their own frame bias are just exemplary of a failure to understand the multiplicity of frames and why some frames can legitimately be said to be superior in some contexts and others cannot because of the particular qualities.
Right. So to me, that's a very good example of how Buddhism deals with these things. There are absolutes in terms of do not kill, do not steal, and not just from a legalistic framework, but also because you're making bad causes and you will get those bad effects and your life will not go well. But then there's a lot of things like this paradigm, that paradigm, this interpretation, the health thing, the, vaccination thing, the whatever, that Buddhism says there may be these paradigms and they may be healthy in general, but they may not apply to me. And I need to seek my own inner wisdom about what's right for me. And over time, that wisdom may change. In early circumstances, this may be what I need to do. Later on in my life, maybe this is what I need to do, or maybe there's more science, or maybe there's, whatever impacting or influencing me. But it
I
comes
guess
down to my
my point would
decision, my
be that
wisdom.
objectively, we don't really need to seek our own inner wisdom regarding things that are morally prohibited. That we only need to seek wisdom, whether it's inside of us or whether it's through prayer to a presumed external God or whatever. That we only need that kind of positive. We only need that kind of wisdom regarding positive moral indications, not regarding negative moral indications.
I would think you want to have that wisdom about all aspects of your life because we also have seen in every culture, every religion, every government that over time, our consciousness and our evaluation of what's morally correct changes. So at certain point in time, women
I
got
think you're
200 and
mistaking. I think you're mistaking wisdom for ambiguity. So on absolute moral truths, our wisdom regarding those doesn't change over time. And what happens is people use language badly to try to construct holistic truths out of things that are definitely reductive truths, which means to say we can walk back the steps by which we can get there intellectually or logically based on one or two basic aphorisms that most people would agree with. So the thing is, it's not the case that our basic moral truths have changed over time at all. Don't violate the rights of another person is underlying at least most Christian commandments, and and the point is that doing so incurs a consequence, a status of sin, right? But regardless, the thing is, if you want ambiguity regarding basic moral questions, then you can't claim to have any real answers about them. Because if you have basic moral questions that have ambiguous answers like process answers like, well, you just need to seek wisdom internally, well, then that's not usable for anything argumentationally, right? You have to delegate that kind of thinking to its proper realm, which is the magical thinking realm, and only use it for positive moral indications, or else you're underserving both language, sort of divinity, and human and the capacity of human beings to reason.
so you talked about Christianity having these absolute moral principles, don't abuse people, don't mistreat people.
Yeah, I describe Christianity as a paradigm as basically saying there's a respect the rights of others. In other words, a basic moral prohibition against interference underlying the negative rights part, and on the positive indication part, it's about forgiveness. That the altruistic person is better than justice. What's better than justice is forgiving somebody else's wrongdoing, honest in some
Mhm.
honest way, right? And so it's not required of you, but it's suggested as the path forward ultimately, right? Regardless,
Right.
the important thing is whether or not you agree that our understanding of forgiveness has changed over time, whether or not that positive moral indication is subject to shifting meanings. Don't violate the rights of other people is not really and hasn't ever been. It's just been subject to people smushing around the concepts and words into unrecognizable forms to justify atrocities. But beyond that, the basic moralities have never changed.
Well, I guess I would argue with that in the sense that the statement or the underlying paradigm might be don't disrespect the rights of others, don't treat them badly, et cetera, et cetera. But we excluded huge populations
Well,
in
but
our history.
how people apply those principles. I addressed that right before I stopped talking, which is obviously people twisted language as they typically do into unrecognizable forms. If I'm a judge and they write a law as they did, Section 1984, which holds public officials accountable for any rights violations, subject to civil liability, and I interpret that law to mean everybody except judges. Well, I mean, you can claim I'm interpreting it, but that's in contrast to the clear meaning of the language of the law. So, in that situation, what you say is somebody is abusing language, right? But the basic meanings remain the same. And for people who are honest about the meaning of words and use word language honestly, there's, for the negative stuff, the meaning of don't violate people's rights has never changed, right? And never
Well, and
will.
that, okay, if that's the framework, it's not just language, it's actual behavior. But we'll agree that people twist it, and we'll leave it at that. Buddhism has an absolute moral imperative that we respect the dignity and value of each individual life. That's non negotiable. It's
Okay.
an absolute, much like your Christianity
So
statement.
how do you respect the dignity and legitimacy of the vegetables you eat?
I praise them. I sing to them in my garden. I thank them for being there to nourish my body,
So
much like
if
and
I
in
if I politely slaughter you for consumption, that's respectful, but if I impolitely slaughter you for consumption, it's disrespectful?
okay, I feel like we're playing word games at this point.
No, I'm using words correctly to point out
Okay.
some flaws in what you're saying. And what you might call black and white thinking is actually called using words correctly. Okay? So I'm using the words to mean what they mean, and I'm pointing out that you've
Okay.
got some problems here with your worldview. It doesn't maintain scrutiny, right? It doesn't withstand scrutiny.
So how does Christianity resolve eating animals and eating plants, vegetables?
They're there for us to consume.
And that's the same in Buddhism.
That's not
They
what
are
you
part of
said.
what
You said the
support.
purpose is for you to respect and admire and cherish them or whatever.
I do, but that's me. I appreciate that they're there, but they are there for us to consume and nourish our bodies and sustain our life.
This is the first time I've ever heard any Buddhist say that animals and plants are there for us to consume.
Well, I think you may be thinking of older forms of Buddhism and those commandments. But if you don't, what do you,
Well, look, you're the one who said
how,
the behavior matters, not so much the words, right? And then you proceed to tell me how you respect the things you eat by saying words to them, despite the fact that your behavior of killing and eating them is clearly the determinant factor on whether or not it's respectful.
I don't agree.
Okay, but what I just said is factually the case.
I don't see it as any different than Christians saying, we're respecting life and I'm going to eat this vegetable. I'm going to eat this cow. I'm going to
I don't
eat.
remember Christians ever saying they're respecting all life.
Okay.
Don't they kind of uniquely respect human life?
Well, other people's paradigms might say that might be very exclusionist.
Well, I mean, granted, but it's not hypocritical.
I don't think the Buddhist view is hypocritical. We
I
use
mean, you say
things,
we're
mean
killing and
things.
eating things as respecting them, but that's just lying.
Well, that's your viewpoint. I don't think it's lying.
Well,
I
would it be
think there are
respectful for me to
humane and
kill and eat
inhumane
you?
ways. I'm sorry?
Would it be respectful for me to kill and eat you?
Probably not.
Okay, well then you're applying. You say I'm being exclusionary, but you're throwing multiple the same standard in different metrics all over the place. You're just willy nilly with your standard. You're not applying it evenly.
I am applying it evenly.
You in one point you say behavior matters, not words. In the next little breath, you say basically your behavior doesn't matter, it's your words. In the next breath, I point out that's a contradiction. You say no, it's not.
It's not a contradiction in our worldview.
Then your
The
worldview
plants
allows
and,
contradictions without naming them such. In other words, you don't name your contradictions as contradictions, you just ignore them.
well, that's one viewpoint, but I don't think that that's an accurate one. And I don't think that there are not similar contradictions in all frameworks and
Well,
Christianity
I,
and
I don't make
the
a lot of
treatment of
claims about
animals
Christianity explaining things, though. The
and
thing is,
gardening practices can be respectful and helpful, or they can be destructive.
well, not everything that's constructive is good. Cancer is very constructive, but it's not good, right?
I don't think most people would use the term constructive, but I get where you're coming from with that.
Okay. Well, this has
Most
been
people would not
interesting.
consider it constructive. They may consider it a wake up call and may decide that they are looking and dealing with the situation
The
as
thing
that
is,
wake up call to change their behavior, or change their viewpoint, or find some meaning or silver lining or value in that. But no, I
well,
don't think they
and
generally
I
think of
don't
it as
object to anybody
constructive.
using any kind of faith-based behavior to accomplish whatever goals they want to accomplish with it. What I'm saying is, it's not a paradigm from which one argues, right? Or else you run into problems like you're running into here.
Well, I think that you may be more enamored of word dissection and uh, overthinking things.
I thought these sounds coming out of your mouth were meant to mean things. Was I mistaken? Were you not meaning things when you spoke?
Yes, I'm meaning things, but I'm not stuck in mind games or
I'm not
over
playing mind games. I
rationalizing.
am not playing mind games. This is the same kind of conversation I had last time with overthinking when I basically said, "Look, all you're telling me is you got some holistic truths that don't reduce. Fine. Well, those are just magical thinking things then, and that's much there to say about it." And he's saying, "Well, no, it's deeper than that. There's more to it. You're not getting it." Blah 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 blah. Well, I'm digging here. I'm asking the pertinent questions, and I'm not getting answers to suggest to me that there's anything meaty here worth paying attention to, further than just saying, well, it's another magical thinking frame, right?
Well, I think that it is much deeper. And one of the biggest parts of this, our Buddhist framework, is how do we use our practice and our understanding of life's laws and the law of cause and effect to improve our life, our daily life, and help other people to understand those humanistic principles.
Okay, but I think if, to the extent that you're representing this school of thought, number one thing should be don't try to convince people with words, right? Because those aren't, you can't sustain those kind of claims that you were making earlier when I asked you whether it's moral absolutist or relativist. You want to split the difference. You don't want to commit to a given status, which you consider black and white thinking. Well, that's fine, but then don't try to engage in black and white thinking to justify it.
Okay.
All right. Well, thank you very much for visiting with us today, and pleasure having you. And I hope you have a great afternoon. And may the Buddha bless you in all of your dealings.